ego's biggest tricks, one of the tricks of the ego that it does not want you to know about. Because if you know about this trick and you raise it up into awareness, then you no longer fall for it. And that's a fast way to wake up to divine love, is not falling for tricks. But this trick, like a scheme or a game, trick.
A T-R-I-C-K.
Yeah, a trick of the ego. Now, if this world was only pain and suffering and hurt and tragedy, if it was only that, would it be easy to drop? No. You could drop it like a hot potato, poof. If everything burned, you could drop it like a hot potato, and boom, it's back to the kingdom of heaven and nirvana. But the ego disguises itself, and as everyone knows from this world and this cosmos, there are a lot of things that seem to be very attractive in this world. Very attractive. Like fool's gold, that's what makes it so sneaky. That's the trick. If it was all this pain and suffering and misery, you could drop this world so fast it would be gone in an instant. But the ego uses the duality of pain and pleasure. In fact, in this world, to the human being, these two things seem to be what? Very, very different. So much so that we could say there's whole philosophies built on maximizing the pleasure and minimizing the pain. And the ego is never going to tell you one thing. They're the same. They're identical. Pleasure and pain are identical. Now on the surface, when you first start to take a look at this, Jesus teaches this in A Course in Miracles. It's a big trick. It takes a lot of faith to say, okay, I'm listening. How are you going to explain this one to me? Because it sounds pretty profound, but it doesn't feel that way. Everyone who's experienced the pleasures and the pains can say, I think I can tell the difference between pleasure and pain. And he's saying, nope, you're in a state of mind in this world that's so confused that you can't even tell the difference between pain and joy, he says. That's pretty confused. You can't tell the difference between pain and joy. In fact, he says that pleasure is part of a flip side, a trick from the ego that's actually called the attraction to guilt. In other words, that the ego can make the guilt so attractive that you keep going for it. You keep grabbing for it. You keep grabbing for it over and over in linear time, and you keep falling for the trick, and you keep getting stuck in the guilt, then that's what the ego wants you to do. It wants you to remain stuck in its game, in its universe. So, I use the example of, a lot of people have heard of Marilyn Monroe. Sex appeal, gorgeous in terms of body, movie star, actress, fame, money, famous husbands, Joe DiMaggio, the Yankee Clipper, Arthur Miller, famous playwright, even famous husbands. Even had the President of the United States in her era, John F. Kennedy, lusting after her. Now, from the pinnacle of the world's perspective, she had everything, right? She had the fame, the money, the famous husbands, the president lusting after her. She had everything the world would consider as valuable. And she was depressed. She was suicidal. Years later, Elton John would write the song Candle in the Wind about how sad and lonely this woman was. And that's a good example. Marilyn Monroe actually comes to mind a lot as a very good example about how if you follow the ego's teachings in the mind, you will come to a place of depression. You will think you're on the roads, kind of like in Pinocchio when he gets distracted away into Pleasure Island. He thinks, I don't have to go to school, I don't have to take responsibility for things, I can just go with all the other boys and have fun all day in Pleasure Island. And what happens? It turns into a really horrific experience for Pinocchio. And this is a little parable for the whole human race. Now, on the surface of things, it's like we could look at this metaphysically and we could say that, how is this working? How did the ego devise this sneaky trick to keep us all feeling guilty and stuck on planet Earth or in time and space and forget our eternal reality? Is that the world was made, remember I said there were these two thought systems, fear and love, and it was an intolerable conflict to try to believe in both, to try to hold both fear and love in your mind. So the world, the cosmos, was an attempt to, it was intolerable to throw the guilt out into time and space, to relieve the tension. So instead of feeling this terrible feeling like, oh my God, I've separated from God, I've ripped my mind away from God, which was a horrific idea, the ego made up time and space as a way to dilute it. Not so horrific as one terrible instant. Let's spread it out over a millennium. Little teeny bits of pains and pleasures experienced over millions and millions of years. Almost like, I've used the example, if somebody had a drop of poison that they were going to give you, we're talking really potent poison, and they said, I'm going to give you a drop of poison, and you must drink of this poison. But you have to do that. That's the one condition. You have to drink the drop. Now, you can decide how you want to take it, but you've got to take it. You could say, okay, put the drop in the ocean over there, and I'll take a drink of the ocean. You see how it would kind of dilute it a little bit? Put the drop in the ocean, let it splash around, let the tide come in and out, and then I'll take a drink of the ocean, because it would dilute it. Well, that's what the ego tried to do. It tried to make up a world of time and space so it could dilute the guilt of believing the separation from God was possible, so you'd be stuck in this little human body and seemingly dealing for lifetimes, over and over, of pains and pleasures, and meanwhile the ego never tells you the secret that pain and pleasure are the same illusion. In fact, Jesus says, why are they the same? They both reinforce the reality of the body as your identity, because they're dualistic. Now joy, or love, or peace, these are natural states of mind that don't have to do with the pains and pleasures of this world. That's your natural inheritance. This is what's been covered over by all this dualism. So, I have to say in my life, when people think about going on this spiritual journey, one of the things that scares people the most is they think, I've read about the lives of the mystics and saints, some of those Catholic mystics and saints, and I've read St. John of the Cross and the Dark Nights of the Soul and this and that, and starving and fasting and penance and all this stuff. It doesn't sound very attractive. I mean, it's much easier to just have a life that seems to have a little bit of a mixture of things. But what it is what I'm saying is, when you go into work miracles, which is really what A Course in Miracles is about, it gets you in touch with your purpose, which is the joy. And that has to take over in your mind to the point that you're not going to fall into the tricks of pain, pleasure, which is purely seeking for a satisfaction. What can we say about pain and pleasure? One thing we could say is they're temporary. They come in little bits and pieces, and there's no lasting satisfaction. I mean, when you have a particular food or a particular sexual encounter, or you have a particular experience in the climate or the world or whatever, it's very, very transitory. And then the ego says, okay, now you got to go back again. Go for it again. And again, and again, and again, and again. And all of us know that it just doesn't satisfy you. You end up feeling a little bit like there's got to be more. Like the old Peggy Lee song, is that all there is? Is that all there is? Is that all there is? Everybody in this world sings that tune at some point. So, you come to a book like Course in Miracles, and he goes, okay, the world's an illusion, but you're dividing the world up into the good illusions and the bad illusions, the painful illusions and the pleasureful illusions, thereby denying that it's an illusion. You know, if illusion means not real or unreality, you can't have good unreality and bad unreality. You can't have pleasureful unreality and painful unreality. If you fall into the ego's trap, all you're doing is you're saying, no, the world of duality is reality. I mean, if you follow the ego, that's the only conclusion you can come to. And then, what do you get if you get that? Then war is real. Then pestilence and disease. You have to get you get the whole package. If you deny the truth and you accept illusions, then you end up with a package of illusions that seem real. And they do seem very real when you are believing in them. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, what I tell people is, the spirit inside you is very gentle and only wants a little bit of willingness to work with. So, if you read the Course, you know, he's saying, I'm going to train you to be a miracle worker. Regardless of what you thought you were going to do with your life, this is what you're going to be. You're going to be a miracle worker. And he gives a real specific training program. There are many other pathways to it too. The Course is not special. It's not, there's nothing special about it. It's just one path on the universal curriculum. But if you just have that little desire, you start meeting people, you start having synchronicities, you start having things happen in your life that is showing you that this is not a world of randomness. This is not just a place where there's some that are lucky and some that are unlucky, some that get dealt a good hand and some that get dealt a bad hand. You start to realize that it's all happening for the awakening, that everything that's occurring is purposeful because of the purpose behind it. And the most important thing about the Course is it takes you past the idea that you're a victim. There's a line in the Course that says, I am responsible for what I see. I choose the feelings that I experience, and I decide upon the goal that I would achieve. And everything that happens to me, I ask for and receive as I have asked. Now that is a pretty tight picture. There is no way that you could follow that teaching and perceive yourself as a victim of the world. If you're totally in charge of your state of mind, and you're totally in charge of your feelings and your thoughts and your perceptions, then there is no one and no thing that can ever burden you. In fact, there's an early workbook lesson where Jesus says, I can be hurt by nothing except my thoughts.
Except that?
My thoughts. I can be hurt by nothing except my thoughts. In other words, if you're suffering, there is only one cause of that suffering, and that's the thoughts that you're thinking, the thoughts that you're holding on to. Jesus calls them attack thoughts. Attack thoughts. Attack. Attack thoughts. Attack thoughts. Attack thoughts.
Thoughts. Attack thoughts. To attack thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that's why we go into these ideas so carefully, because you have to expose all the unconscious attack thoughts in your mind and then release them. In fact, he starts out lesson 1, nothing I see means anything. Lesson number 2, I have given everything I see all the meaning that it has for me. And he continues on, going back and forth between, number 4 is, these thoughts do not mean anything. So he's going back and forth between the perceptual world that you think you see and the thoughts in your mind that you think. And he's saying, that world is not your real world. That world out there, seemingly out there with all this pain and suffering and pleasures and all this craziness going on, that's not your real world. And those thoughts that you're thinking in your mind, your little whirling through your consciousness, those aren't your real thoughts. And he actually goes so far as to say that the world that we see is a hallucination. It's kind of like being in the desert someday, when you're really hot and tired.
Morgana, yes.
Yeah, it's just like a hallucination. Very much like with drug experiences when you feel like you're hallucinating. He's saying, well, your everyday world is the same. This is pretty humbling stuff. I mean, it's like, oh my God, could I have been duped that much to believe in a world? And he says, yep. He said, you built this world. You learned it. You just kept adding layers and layers and layers of illusions on top of each other. Kind of the opposite of peeling the onion. You built the onion. Or for people who like the sports metaphors, like the inside of a golf ball. You ever seen the inside of a golf ball? You got the core, and then it's wrapped with all these layers of rubber, like rubber bands strung really tight. He said, you never stopped to pause in your building of this world. You never stopped to pause to say, what am I doing this for? You just kept building and building and building, illusions upon illusions upon illusions, making it more and more complicated, and never stopping once to ask yourself, what am I doing this for? What's the purpose of all these illusions? So now he goes the other way, and he says, now we're going to start peeling. We're going to start going through the illusions. We're going back to the core. And that's really what this Course in Miracles is all about. It just takes growingness. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to be intelligent. You don't have to have special skills and abilities. I certainly look at my life, and I was shy and reserved, and I was unsure and uncertain and doubtful in so many ways in my life. And now I feel like I'm confident, I'm certain, I'm sure. I'm invulnerable. I can go to countries now where there are armed gunmen around me on a regular basis. I wave to them. I kind of go by, they get the big guns, and I kind of smile and wave at them. And believe me, when you're in purpose, when you're serving God, I think one time that was maybe in the Bible, if God is with us, who can be against us, is kind of the way that it says. In other words, if you're tuned in with your purpose, if you're about your purpose,
you are safe.
You are safe. You are more safe and secure than any amount of weapons or anything could ever do. That's where you get your invulnerability.
The same applies to the chicken, what is it, or the bird flu. Yeah. It's one hysteria. And the neighbor, they go with their mask and everything, and disinfect everything and kill everything that could be looking like a bacteria.
Yeah, it's up here.
Yeah, all right.
It's all in the mind, right?
Right.
So this is important to know, because what this is doing, now imagine now the spirit in you is going to work with your belief system. And it's not like the ascetic path. You don't have to go out and live on the mountain and not have any ice cream and not ever have a piece of candy again. And we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is that the Spirit will actually use your belief system when you start to open to it, and you may end up with horse racing, you may end up with horses, or lots of ice cream, or whatever. I mean, it's not to say that you guys go, woe is me, all right, Jesus, I'll be a miracle worker. What have I got to give up? What have I got to give up? You know, no, it goes the other way. It's like the Spirit uses your preference pattern, and you get like these whims. It could be for horse, it could be for things that you don't even want. You may be praying and asking, God, my husband and I need something to join on and to come together. And then you end up with horse races, you know, and something that you never, in a million years you could have never foreseen that. But it's just the way that the Spirit works. It's humorous, it's cosmic humor, it's funny. You have a ball, too. Anybody who thinks this is a journey of sacrifice, no way. I feel like I just got in. I'm having more fun now flowing around in the Spirit than ever. And it's not, ceremonious churches and I've got to give a mass and an afternoon mass or wear some kind of big hat and robe and everything. I probably did that in the past life or something. But now it's like it's spontaneously flow with the joy of the purpose. And every day it's like being like a child with a new sense of wonder and glee. And that's the joy of this whole journey. That's what this is all really about.
You're talking about victim.
Yeah.
I guess most of us feel that way, that we've been victimised. I don't know, maybe I'm talking out of turn, but it appears to me that a lot of people who meet and myself also feel a victim. What were you meaning when you said that we can step out of that?
Well, victimization always, I could say, is a perception, and victimization is always an interpretation. So the only way out of victimization is to train your mind so that instead of instinctively reacting to something, you are detached and you are able to observe whatever's occurring without a perception or an interpretation of victimization. So that's what Jesus attempted to do with the crucifixion scene, the crucifixion and the resurrection. He did not suffer. I know people think that Jesus suffered, died, and suffered on the cross, and this and this and that, and people still have guilt. Recently with the Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ, people watched that movie and they felt so much guilt. Almost like, oh my God, I can't believe we did that to that guy. He was going around being a friendly guy and talking about love, and then we put him on the cross.
Yeah.
But what he's saying in there is, what I was talking about earlier, when you release the guilt in your mind, the body no longer feels the pains or the pleasures. You free your mind of the guilt.
The mind isn't in the body anymore.
Right, it isn't. Right. In fact, it never was. It seems to be like, with the way it seems in this world, it seems like there are things happening in the body. And initially, when you're first starting your mind training, it's important to pay attention to how you feel. And we're not saying if you feel a pain in your head or if you feel a pain in your foot to deny that, but just take it a lot deeper. And before you justify it and say, oh, I know the reason why, you learn to go deeper into your mind.
But Christ did ask, if you can, Lord, please, let this goblet pass me.
It was quoted as saying that, although...
that's what they say.
Yeah, but if you look carefully at the Gospels, he knew exactly what was going to happen. In other words, he was telling, before that quote was in there, he was telling the apostles exactly about the temple being torn down and rebuilt. So there are distortions that are part of the Bible, and even with that, why would somebody say, take this cup from me, if they knew what the cup was and knew exactly what's going to happen and knew how it was all going to play out?
It's not that cut and dried. That's what the point I try to make. If Christ had said, oh well, it's really nothing to me, and he had acted, oh well, all right, so be it, then people would not have been convinced in their hearts that it was horrible and painful. How many would change places with him, So I mean...
if you're honest, if you take a look at what the Gospels even show us, is that Jesus was defenseless. In other words, even though they had a trial, defenseless. He was defenseless, meek. Even when they had a trial and they paid false witnesses, he didn't defend.
No, he did not defend, because he said, your will, or Father, your will. It wasn't his will, he submitted. And of course I would say, to be able to do that, he must have had a fair idea of another world, another reality that would sustain him.
Yes.
Sure. But he
this.
still had to go through somehow, through that earthly scenario, didn't he?
Yes,
because otherwise, how could he move a whole world after all? I mean, it was 2,000 years ago, but there are many Christians now, or people who try to follow that.
Yeah.
I mean, so my point is exactly that whatever there is in, the grisly things, I know how it is, I know how I feel when I see torture. It gives me the living willies, the creeps. When we see it on TV, sometimes.
So let's take that. In other words, you perceive that. You perceive
I can, and it's then that I hold on to spirit. I haven't got anyone else. But spirit to me is a real thing. It's real. And I see light. Spirit, yeah, it's all right, but the primal thing is light. We are beings of light.
So the interpretation, this is really what's helpful with the Course is Jesus tells us that the only interpretation of the crucifixion is this: teach only love, for that is what you are.
Love and light, it's the same, it's the only reality.
When you look through the ego's lens, for example, if you happen to be walking along and you saw a man that had been hammered, his body had been hammered to a cross, and he was bleeding.
Yeah.
Okay? Through the body's eyes, and certainly through the ego's interpretation, you could say that through the ego's lens, you could say that's got to hurt. I mean, to have spikes through your arms and legs and on a cross for hours. But again, what I'm teaching, and really what the question was, how do you not perceive yourself as a victim? That's really what we're looking at here, is there has to be another interpretation for this world that is loving. In other words, if it seems like there's always people, and even the climate, even you could say even the environment seems to do things like tsunamis, beyond people like Hitler or Mussolini or whatever, but just tsunamis, hurricanes, tornadoes, what seems to be just part of the natural world. If you are identified with a body, then it seems like there's a lot of things outside that body that are pretty dangerous in this world to that body. Terrorists, tsunamis, it just goes on and on. And a lot of homicides are within spousal, husband-wife relationships at very high rates in those kind of relationships. Now, what I had to do is, all those are memories, you might say, that are based on the ego. And when you learn to forgive and you learn to clear your mind of those judgments, those attack thoughts, those interpretations, you find that there's a whole other way to look at the world in a very, very realistic way. And I use this example a lot, but let me give you an extreme example of this, because sometimes it takes an extreme example to kind of make the point. A friend of Kirsten and I, Axel, who's up in New York City, he was there in 2001 when the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center, came down. And about 10 days after the towers came down, they call it Ground Zero, he and a group of Course in Miracles students and teachers were guided to walk right down in there to New York City, right into Ground Zero, 10 days after the towers came down. So he's walking in, and he's in a very miraculous state of mind, very, very peaceful and joyful, very tuned in to God and love as he's walking in. And he walked in closer, 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 and got down really close, and there was a man who came and was in front of him, and it was a little Japanese man who was wearing a plaid suit. And the Japanese man, his head was down, and he was shaking his head going, oh, terrible, 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 terrible. He was just bowed down in just what appears to the world to be extreme grief at this situation. And then Axel, my friend, who's the Course in Miracles teacher, had a wisp of a thought that went through his mind as he was in his miraculous state of mind. And the wisp of the thought was, what if my happiness is an affront to this man? And you can see what that thought is, because the thought is dualistic. There's happiness, and then there's this man who seems to be in grief. And as soon as my friend Axel had that thought, what if my happiness could be an affront to this man, he smelled the smells of Ground Zero. He felt the soot and the dust going up his nostrils. He felt the heat. He felt everything, the dirt, and actually the grief. He said he felt like the sense of grief and death of the whole world, he said he felt at that moment. Now this is a good teaching example because of the contrast. He's in a miracle state of mind, and then all of a sudden he has one thought, wonder if my happiness could be a affront to this man, and all of a sudden he's drawn down into the whole realm of this. And he's perceiving victimization and the whole deal. So he did what any good Course in Miracles student or teacher should do. Help! Back to God. Help! I need help here. And what happened was, he was able to line back up and get back up to the line with spirit and get back into the joy. And when he did, he got back into the joy of the miracle. The man, the Japanese man, turned around to him and looked him right in the eyes and said, kind of in a rhythmic kind of cadence, I can see by the way that you feel that you know that none of this is real. The same Japanese man. Now, to me, I like that story because that shows you the power of the mind. He had to join again with truth, join again with God, with reality, and it took him back into that lifted up state, which he was in originally, which all of us were in originally, and we're training our minds to go back. So what that story does is it shows that pain is a misperception. Suffering is a misperception. It doesn't matter how grand the scale, whether it's Twin Towers have just come down, whether it's Nazi Germany, whether it's in Russia afterwards with Stalin, and we're talking tens of thousands of people that seem to be killed. It doesn't matter how many births there seem to be in this world or how many deaths. It still comes down to what is my perception, and is my perception in alignment with God's love. So these are the teachings of the Course that for most people who work in spirituality and who work with the Course are the most difficult, because what they're doing is he's saying, you've got to get into something deeper than empathy. Counselors try to empathize, sometimes with clients, and we were talking about psychotherapy, when you empathize with the client, and the client starts to, woe is me, go down, down, down. If the counselor empathizes and agrees with, they both go down the toilet together. But what he's teaching in there is he's saying we need to practice to learn true empathy. Stay with the truth. Stay right-minded. Stay with the joy and the love that's in your mind, and then you will lift your brothers and sisters up too.
I see what you mean.